How's it going, ladies and boys? I'm Bob Sixkilla and welcome back to Sekimeiya and the ghost town of Yushibana, apparently. Which possibly is all in Shidoya's head, but I don't think so, frankly. I don't think that's in her head at all. Just like the person who was following her is also definitely not in her head. There's definitely more people than before, it's fine. Minutes earlier, I'd been really anxious due to the state of Yushibana, and I just made it up. It was all I could think it was. I couldn't be relieved yet because all around me, I could only see shudders. One after one of them would move away. If only after one of them moved would any remaining doubt dissipate. I leaned against the cold wall, questioning myself. It was such a horrible feeling. Very soon I heard a loud grinding sound. I turned to the mug symbol and to see it rising, uncovering the dim interior through the glass. Darfay was inside with a ring of keys in his hand. He unlocked the door and pushed the shutter all the way up. I approached nervously before he noticed me. Shidoya, what are you doing here so early? I was waiting for you to open. I really wanted to go somewhere for some reason. I thought you opened at 7:30 though. You're right. I'm sorry I'm late. Have you been waiting for a while? I've been here for a bit, but don't worry. Well, now I feel bad. Come in. You must be really cold. I went through the transparent door, lightly tapping the snow off my shoes. I was glad that everything was alright. I couldn't understand if something strange had really just happened, but the warmth alleviates my worries. Sorry, it'll take a bit for the heat to get going. That's fine, it's much better than outside. I stepped further in and looked at the multitude of pastries behind the glass as I removed my hood. Meanwhile, Darfay grabbed a few chairs from the pile in the corner and put them beside the tables. What do you want? These are all recently baked. I pointed at the same chocolate-covered one I had before, unaware of its name. I'd heard before that eating warm pastries wasn't healthy, and to always wait for them to cool off, but I was too hungry to care. I eagerly waited while Darfay went behind the counter, biting it immediately after the tiny plate was placed in front of me. Darfay looked pretty busy preparing everything. He got 2 batches of bread out of the oven and placed them in the usual spot. I'll need a coffee too. The same way? Yeah. Alright, give me a moment. I felt completely rested after waking up, but that had drastically changed. Staring at the wood, I kept biting the pastry, its warmth permeating my body. Darfay put an empty cup below the coffee machine and filled it up. Do you want to sit at a table? I looked behind me. Next to the low tables was a wide screen of glass, intercepting soft flakes of snow. Yeah, I'll sit there. I already finished up the pastry, so I grabbed the cup by its rim and carefully brought it to the closest table. I sat on one of the 2 chairs, its angle allowing Ramon to be seen. What had been going on about? There were a number of pedestrians walking with an umbrella above them. I touched the glass with a finger, feeling again how cold it had been outside. With the other hand, I gripped the hot coffee tightly, a stark contrast. Then I slowly brought it to my lips. It's burning. They really are a lot less hot when I make them at home. I placed it back down, Darfay still arranging everything properly behind the counter. I waited for a bit for the coffee to cool off and started to drink it. I finished it in a few sips. Seconds later I began to notice a faint headache, a frequent side effect coffee had on me. That's funny because I get a headache when I don't drink coffee. It's real weird, I have to keep putting caffeine in my body or I get a headache. It's really fucking annoying. It's because I've been drinking coffee so much for so long, you know? I get withdrawals. Do you have any water? Water, yeah, of course. Darfay's head peeked out from under the counter, and he filled up a glass with a bottle of water. I stood to grab it from the other side and drank it in the hopes of alleviating the pain. The effect was almost immediate, and the pleasant change of temperature refreshed my mouth. I reclined in the chair, still a little rattled. I turned my head to the door after hearing it open. A man I hadn't seen outside entered the cafe and stepped up to the bar with moist footsteps. Lovely, moist footsteps, my favourite kind. What'll it be? Still looking a little busy, Darfay addressed him while he scanned the wooden trays behind the counter. I'll have 2 loaves of spelt bread. This one? The man nodded, and Darfay packed both loaves into a thin bag that he handed over. What else? That's all. That'll be 280 yen then. Thank you. After being handed a few coins, Darfay bowed as the man quietly walked out. Following that, more and more people began to enter. I saw everyone come in and out from my chair. Most of them had come to buy bread, which had almost run out already. It was hard to believe the place would evolve throughout the day, becoming a bar in the evening. Everyone had instantly left without sitting anywhere, as the chairs and stools were primarily used later in the day. The cafe was open the entire day, on every day of the week. However, even though Darfay was the main person behind it, I'd frequently seen members of his family behind the counter. He couldn't do it all himself. Once a few minutes had gone by without any new customers, Darfay addressed me. "Been here a while. Do you want anything else?" I don't think so. I'm still hungry, but I don't really want another pastry." "That's fine. Have you talked to your parents?" "Yeah, I called my mum the other day. We talked a bit, but they're going to stay where they are. I already mentioned that's also what I prefer." "Are you sure about that? Is it that you want to be alone, or that you don't want your parents to come?" "I think I prefer being alone, at least at home." "I can understand that. I'm glad you're okay, but I suppose I can't really accept that they won't come back. I was really shocked when I learned they'd moved away without you." I didn't know what else to say. He realised I was looking a little down and changed the subject. "Well, I'm happy you came back already. You were there very early, though." "I went to sleep pretty early too, and for some reason, I felt like going out somewhere again." "You should have at least grabbed an umbrella, but it's impressive how strong you are." He smiled gently at me. "Oh, right, I guess he isn't aware that I'm still in the hospital. There's no reason he would know that without calling my parents. Will he find out on the 8th? I don't know what I'll say if he does." "So, what have you been doing these last couple of days?" "Not much. I went to Atsuki's house yesterday and I was there for a while." "Atsuki's house? You think being there helps you?" "I think so, yeah." "I see. You looked saddened too, but I hadn't lied. I wasn't entirely certain how I was able to feel so tranquil at home by myself, but I suspected that if Atsuki hadn't invited me to his house from the hospital in the first place, I wouldn't have been able to bear it. The pain we'd felt from Mia's death had practically hung in the air at his house, but we'd been able to withstand it together. I don't want to put any pressure on you, but I'm curious if you have any idea about what you'll do. Last I heard you were considering studying medicine, right?" "Sorry, maybe this isn't a good time to ask these questions." "Don't worry, I don't know though. I don't even know anything about medicine. It's just one of the few areas I could think of that I could find interesting. But I'm not sure I want to keep studying. I think it's a lot more likely I'll try and find a job." "Is that so? I was thinking that I wouldn't at all mind letting you work here for a few hours a week. Would you be interested? It'll give you something to do, and you wouldn't have to depend exclusively on your parents." That offer came out of nowhere, and I was left a little shocked. I don't know. Maybe. I'll think about it, can I? I really appreciate it though." "Of course, this isn't a decision you have to rush, and it's an offer that isn't going anywhere, so tell me if you think it'd be good for you." "Okay." "I'm pretty sure Darfy's got the hots for you, Shidoya. Admittedly, if that had been proposed to me before December, I might have accepted immediately, as I'd already been desperately lacking an actual path to take, but part of me just wanted the days to continue. It was a selfish and impossible wish, but the 2 days of December I'd redone had possessed a calmness I'd rarely known despite my own paranoia. Someone opened the door, so Darfay had to attend them. Darfy. I looked through the glass at Ramon. I could see a person dressed in a green uniform removing the snow on the ground. Some was still falling, but it had become too light to build up. After my brief talk with Darfy, I had taken notice of something. Everything that I'd been worried about for months had become meaningless. Technically, at the moment, none of that mattered anymore. Studying medicine, moving away, getting a job, all of that would be irrelevant if I travelled to the past again or if I modified history. It would all have been for nothing. I would strive to prevent the death of a friend, isolating myself in a world where not a single thing of what I'd constantly worried about would occur. And I'd really try to do it. Sitting on that chair, I'd sporadically feel a sharp pain in my chest, a pain warning me that it could have been my last visit to Ina, and my last real day in Yushibana. Any day could have been my last one before needing to take action. I'd come to really appreciate the odd serenity I could feel. For that reason, if the end of the countdown was that close, I tried to prolong it a little bit more. And since all I wished for was the calmness I felt, I remained on that chair where it existed, witnessing the outside world move through the glass. This is a good track, man. It's real chill. Letting the time pass was what I most and least wanted. I stayed there, glancing out and believing it was the best way to use the time I still had. Darfy must have noticed that too, as he didn't resume the conversation once the silence had returned. There was nothing else I thought I could do on the December 3rd. The only thing that remained was going to the tower and learning what would come next. Before that, there was only an optional step. It was deciding. I still had the ability to choose. It wasn't true that going to the tower was essential for that. No matter what I'd find there, Deciding whether to change the past or not was possible, even though I'd done my best to believe that I'd never choose the latter. After all, I touched the Sekimeiya to change the past, and it would have been for nothing if I later decided not to. But perhaps that was wrong. I couldn't think anymore that touching the Sekimeiya would have been for nothing, even if I decided not to alter history. The days I was living through did mean something to me. What would actually happen if I step aside and choose not to go to the tower again? I don't think that'd actually be so simple either. Late on the 15th, I disappeared from the tower, leaving the others behind. If everything happens as it did, Atsuki will try to travel to the past himself. The mystery of the recording will come back in full force. There really wasn't a single good option, so maybe deciding simply wasn't possible. Instead of trying to determine which of the choices I had was better, would attempting to find a new one serve any purpose? There's just nothing else, is there? It'd always been a concealed alternative that I've been aware of, but it was so unthinkable that I'd chosen to immediately dismiss it. If I didn't change the past, Mia would stay dead, and so would the people who died in the tower. It was even possible Atsuki would too if the exit didn't open after 12 hours. At that point, I could try to enter the building through the storeroom, or make the police do so, but if that door didn't actually lead outside, the recording had a chance to occur a month later. Even though I'd changed the past by calling my mother, that wouldn't necessarily prevent the events of the 15th from occurring. The version of me in the hospital at that moment could still travel back in time the same way I had. I knew that could have been wrong. If, after waking up in the hospital, my mum told me that she'd received my call days prior, even if I ended up travelling in the tower, I wouldn't try to change the past by calling it. The distinction between that Shidoya and me already somewhat existed. So, if that's not the case, and I further change the past, the only negative is that the self of mine currently in the hospital will stop being me, and I'll have to abandon my current life. I'm not really sure I could do that. Then yeah, of course, there was a way to prevent that from happening. Upon changing the past, the problematic variable was solely the other version of myself. Therefore, by removing that variable, I'd be in an ideal world. You talking about killing yourself? The other version of yourself? But that wasn't something I could seriously consider. That possibility simply didn't exist. I spent a very long time beside that glass as it was marked by unending snow. I was getting alarmingly hungry, but for as long as I stayed there, I would be fine. Through the glass and the whirls of white, I was able to see the sun. That meant it had reached the centre of the sky. I continued staring through it, watching the part of Yushibana that had once become as lively as always. That was until I recognised something in the distance. I stood up from the chair, realising that I'd forgotten something. I'll be leaving. How much is it? What, you still think you have to pay? Just tell me, I feel bad about coming so often if I don't pay. That's mean. It's 300 yen. I took my wallet out and paid you the exact amount. Thank you. Sorry for leaving so suddenly, but I need to be somewhere. Don't worry. You know you can come back anytime. I nodded and walked through the door, flipping up my hood. I walked directly to Ramon Street. In the distance, I had recognised a purse. After staring at it for a few seconds, I knew exactly where I'd seen it. I dashed toward the direction I'd seen it. Right above the purse, an umbrella had covered the face of its owner. But that didn't matter. I knew whose purse it had been. While identical ones could exist, I recognised it as Isla's. I ran to the street the umbrella had turned to. Even though I hadn't seen the face of this person, holding it, that umbrella had been lower to the ground than all the others. Isla's friend! Isla's friend that had told her about what had happened is Shidoya. Where Isla's friend? My god, I only just fucking realised that. Anyway, I started moving faster as I reached an area with less snow stuck to the pavement. Ramon was pretty crowded, so I wasn't sure if anyone had been walking beside that umbrella. But I'd recalled something else I'd entirely forgotten about. Isla's friend. That's right. They must be here. A sudden wave of numbness crashed through my head, demanding me to eat something and slow down, but I didn't stop until I'd arrived at the dimmest street I'd seen the umbrella in. I couldn't see anyone. There were multiple doors on both sides and more branching paths further ahead. I don't know what happened to me this morning, but today's definitely a school day. If that was really Isla, it could have actually been her friend, right? Was I correct and her identity was Isla herself? That thought had seemed a little strange in the tower for a number of reasons. She couldn't have gone back in time to repeat exactly what she'd lived, but I had, since learning that at any point such a long travel could have happened without the need for storing energy for a month. Oh. I looked down. From there onwards, snow still covered the ground. As a result, I was able to see a pair of footprints, smaller and less faded than the rest, disappearing ahead. I stepped forward, careful not to lose track of them. The buildings weren't casting dark shadows on the ground, so I was able to follow them without mixing them up. I went all the way down the street, where the footprints turned to the right. Once again, I was close to Atsuki's house, but the marks on the ground deviated from it. There was still no indication of them ending, and I wasn't able to see anyone further ahead. I've been trying to go fast, but once again the footprints turned to the right, and I couldn't spot the umbrella. Isn't this a dead end? Like I thought, that turn brought me to a short street filled with houses. That meant the footprints had to end at the door. And they did. When I lifted my head, I saw a house, the trail ending at its entrance. Does Isla live here? Should I ring the bell? Instead, I warily stepped back as letting myself be seen had some worrying implications. Even if I'd just seen an Isla who travelled from the future, while the original one was likely to not be home, it was very possible Edina was. She told us she'd once found out that Isla hadn't gone to school, which meant that she could have been inside right then. Whether I ring the bell or not, that's the same as finally deciding whether to change the past or not. I'd like to know who Isla's friend is, and if it really is herself, I might learn something very important from her. However, it's also possible Edina will see me, which will change the things pretty drastically. I looked at the building from behind a car. I couldn't see the light through any of the windows and nobody else was close by. I needed to make up my mind, but it was impossible. If I pressed the button next to the door, the rest of my life might have gone up in smoke. It is true that the past will only change. Is it true if the past will only change if I want it to? If so, I could try to ring without that being my intention, but it's so risky, I don't know how it works. I felt my heart racing as I worried about making any rushed action. If I just watch from here and try to observe who the friend is? Maybe I should just leave. I know where Isla lives now, so I could try to prevent them from going to the tower on the 15th. That really might be the best. If I were to do that, and Isla's friend is really herself, she'd end up in the same situation as me, stuck in a world with two versions of her. What will happen after that? How would the world even take it? If they don't go to the tower, Isla won't be able to travel to the past. Would that simply not matter and both of them will continue to live? If upon changing the past, their existence is overwritten, mine will be too, right? How was I supposed to reason any of that out when I knew nothing about what would happen? Time was passing with no progress being made. Every time I questioned what to do, the same fundamental bifurcation emerged. I need to know what I wanted. Can I not do it? Is it actually impossible to decide? It shouldn't be, right? Even if I don't like any of the choices, there still has to be one I prefer. If they're all equally bad, then I can just choose one to stick to, can't I? I can just decide my entire life like that. I need to do it though. And this is when. I'm stretching out the time, I have too much. And I could end up immensely regretting it at any point. I just have to decide now. Even if I wish I'd made another choice later. I can know that now. So I just need to make the decision based on what I feel at this moment. Are you going to give me a choice? I'm ready. But even after thinking all that, I didn't move from behind the car. My thoughts were in complete disarray. I finally stepped out and inspected the dark windows. If I didn't care about changing the past again, trying to reach Isla's friend was the right call. But of course I cared. I couldn't suddenly press a button that would influence my whole life. I looked at the way I'd come from. Nobody was there. I could see my footprints coming toward me, so I quietly traced them, peeking at the previous street. Again, nobody was in sight. I'd felt the same sensation as the day before. I didn't know if I'd noticed a sound or a movement, but my head had suddenly turned to that corner. I looked at the ground, but many footprints were there, and due to the falling snow, it was hard to tell which were recent. Is it really just me? It's not, right? Yesterday, someone was really following me. Did I only imagine it this time? I looked left and right, confirming I was alone. I still felt that Vice today might have been who'd followed me, but he wouldn't do it again. Could it be Isla? No, the footprints I saw yesterday belonged to an adult. I tried to compose myself and walk further into the street. I should just leave. I'm not going to be able to ring the bell. I felt really uneasy thinking that someone might have been watching me from a distance. I couldn't understand why someone would have been. And it put even more pressure on me. I was still very hungry and far from my apartment, but if I went home in a straight line, I'd have to go through all the deserted streets before getting back to the centre. I didn't want to do that if someone was observing me in secret. I was close to the outskirts, so instead of going back, I kept on ahead. When the curved street came to an end, and the short houses stopped, the sight to the tall mountains was wide open. I was at the start of the mountain range, close to the valley that led out of Yushibana. I hadn't seen anyone yet, and there were barely any footprints around. If I'd been followed again, I must have gone the opposite way. I spun in place, confirming again that nobody was there. I doubted anyone was watching me based on where I was. The only place I could have been hiding was within some covered windows, fairly far away. Noticing the slight weight on my head, I shook off the snow piled on it, then I kept walking, my boots sinking deeply in the snow. The path outlining Yushibana was not well maintained. Tall weeds dominated, unfazed by the snow. I'd learned to avoid coming back from Atsuki's house through that route, as it tended to be hard to traverse. Ahead of me I saw a thin path, going up the mountain. Like the entire hill, it was coated in snow, but the lack of grass peeking up highlighted the way. I reached the split and instinctively took the path up the large mountain. Due to another impulse, I found myself climbing the steep path, leaving behind the straight and plain one. I knew it would level out soon, and lead me home despite taking longer. All around me I could only see dried bushes covered in white and tall trees scattered around. I knew the mountains were frequently visited, but I couldn't make out any indications of people having been there. I turned to that path, due to the conversation I'd had with Atsuki in one of the hallway A crystal rooms. It had been so long since both of us had taken that path, but walking up all by myself was still somehow familiar. Would we ever go up together again? That was also something I had to choose. The wind was noticeably stronger higher up. The terrain was plain, and the way branched out. Higher still was the entrance to the caves, whereas the path to the right would take me close to home. I turned around to witness the sight I'd earned. Whoa. The entirety of Yushibana covered by snow. The sight was as pleasant as it had always been, intensified by the moving curtain of falling flakes, which appeared much denser from above. I looked at the way I'd come from, but even from that position, I wasn't able to see anyone. Only when I peered at the centre of town was I able to notice the tiny movements of people on the streets. There wasn't a place I couldn't see. The hospital was close to where I was, most of its windows covered from within. In the distance, the Zube-su trash disposal looked like a perfect circle, appearing as elegant as every other place, thanks to the snow. And of course, close to it, Ashiya Tower. It was rare to see the top of it, but the snow almost made it blend in completely. I looked down to its entrance. I could just barely make it out despite the distance and whirls of snow, but there was no shutter in place. Despite the harsh wind hitting my face, I kept watching with both hands in my pockets, trying not to let the snow fall inside. A very important decision still needed to be made, and even ignoring that decision was its own decision. Was it going to be a better time? As soon as I asked myself that, I knew the answer. Would I try to alter the fate of this town, trapped in a shrouded sequence of events revolving around a magical gemstone? Would I try to save Mia and the people I'd met that day at the cost of my own normal life? Even if I succeeded, I'd have to keep on living in circumstances I couldn't even fathom. I felt like I'd been living in a mire, and when I was finally pulled out of it, I lost everything. The incident in the tower had only made things worse, and I'd finally been saved from it, only to be subsequently forced into destroying things for myself as the right answer. I didn't know if I could accomplish it, but the choice was about whether to try it. I could be caught by the police or beaten to the punch by someone else from the future. If the latter happened, I was letting it happen by not acting. It was my own fault. It was all a mess, and there was no way to make it one. Not to make it one. I wanted to talk to Mia again, but even if I saved her, that wouldn't happen. She hadn't deserved to die, so I could trade positions with her. I wouldn't even be doing it for some twisted form of recognition. Nobody would know what had happened. My other self would exist in my place, and I'd step aside. I looked at the tower, knowing the Sekimeiya was inside. Who else in that town knew about what had happened on the 15th? I wish I could have known them. I just have to go in, find where the Sekimeiya is, and check if I can open the door in the storeroom. I just have to do that, determine what I can do, and enter again during the night. But that wasn't the problem. I would only go back to the tower after knowing whether I truly wanted to change the past. So, would I attempt to alter the hellish world I'd experienced at the cost of the life that I'd always had? Or would I give up on using the Sekimeiya again, accepting the cards we'd been dealt, to create the best future we had at hand? Here we go. This is the choice I've been waiting for. Let's get it. Let's change the past, baby. I've been waiting to do this. I would change the past. I had a way to save Mia, Atsuki, Isla, Katai, Naomi, Edina. I travelled from the 15th to change the past alone, and even though I hadn't been aware of what would happen, I'd considered the outcome with my other self. Looking at the small town had finally brought me to lean toward an option. I decided to do my best to change the past, as the possible consequences didn't outweigh what good could be achieved. But the tower I could see far in the distance, I still couldn't go there. The day I'd enter that building again would likely be the last day of my normal life, and even though I'd decided, the thought could still freeze me in place. I wanted the days I had to persist, but that couldn't happen. My life in Yushibana was likely soon to end, and I could choose the length of the last stretch. If I saved Mia, I wouldn't show myself to her, Atsuki, and the other me, even though I didn't know yet what I would do. So the issue to solve was the possibility of a knowledgeable enemy who could change the past on their own and steal the Sekimeiya before the 15th. I couldn't do much to combat that, aside from rushing in, which I despised the thought of, so I settled on another course of action and accepted that I would take it. Thursday was 2 days away. Every Thursday morning, an event would be held in the tower. That was the day I'd chosen to step into the building for the second time and find the Sekimeiya that was surely confined inside. I tried to breathe properly. If I wasn't beaten to it, I only had one more day that I'd chosen to give myself, hopelessly refusing to let them end so soon. And the very next one, I'd go to the tower, in the morning, and think about the best way to act. Then, I'd put that into effect that very night. What would the event be? I knew Atsuki had read the upcoming ones and had said that only one seemed interesting in late January. There, people would probably ask about the Sekimeiya, might even be held in the event room. We had bought entrance tickets for the 15th many days prior, but when we waited in the lobby I heard people trying to buy them at the reception desk. They'd all been sold out, but if you could buy the tickets directly there, it must have been common to do so, on the day of less important events. And if there are none left, I'll just pay for a normal visit. Joining whatever special event will happen isn't essential. I had to stop staring ahead. The strong wind kept whipping snow in my face and prickling pains chipped at the corners of my eyes. Scanning the ground, I took the path that circled Yushibana. The way wasn't perfectly even and traversing the dense snow was difficult. I had to take the next path leading down, but I couldn't easily see it in the distance due to its identical colour. My stomach was demanding food, and the cold was becoming too prominent to bear. Protecting my head with my hood, I advanced steadily, knowing where I was headed for once. I must have been close to home even though I was going slow. I knew there wasn't much distance between both trails down. I'd been glancing up here and there, but it was hard to recognise the narrow entrance to Yushibana I was going toward. At last I saw the absence of brown on my right. As I thought, it extended all the way down, leading to a dirt road close to my home. I stepped down the steep path, careful not to trip. Slowly I descended until there was concrete below the snow and composed myself. The wind was noticeably weaker, closer to the ground, so I raised my head again. The narrow path soon became a sidewalk where a couple of cars were parked. Like I'd seen from above, nobody seemed to be on the outskirts. I was less than 2 minutes away from home. The apartment was 1 block further, but I had to walk a bit. Is someone behind me again? I could see the metallic staircase far ahead, but I debated whether to stop. No, yesterday that didn't work. They'll just run away. Should I pass by my apartment? What if they know where I live? What if they want to know where I live? I started to feel a little nervous, and I actually felt someone behind me once more. Or was it paranoia? I just needed to go home. I looked at my feet. I could circle this block, and if new footsteps are here when I'm back, I'll know I'm not making anything up. I didn't change my pace, but I avoided even looking at my apartment. I'd just make a very important decision, but I felt indecisive again. Even if I confirmed that I'm right, what would I do? Ignore it? I'd have to go home anyway. Up ahead, the only way to see my back would be by being directly behind me. That means that if I suddenly turn around at the end and someone is watching me, I should see them as well. I bit my lip and kept walking. I couldn't make any motions that indicated I thought someone was behind me, or they'd be able to escape again. If someone was there, I just needed to know who it was. I managed to feel a bit of sweat forming on my palms, despite the overwhelming cold. Depending on who it was, I might have had to act sooner than I expected. I'd passed my apartment. If someone was really looking at me, would the curtain of snow conceal them? If they turned fast enough, identifying them might have been impossible. I was close to the end of the street where it curved into another. If someone was watching me from behind, at that moment, they had to be an eye shot. But I instinctively turned around before I'd planned. A sudden sound had broken the silence far behind me, and as I'd feared, the falling snow was blurring the image. Frowning, I dashed where I'd come toward a blue smudge way ahead. Is that... It immediately became visible. It was a police officer. But that wasn't all, so I didn't stop. Before getting there, I understood what had happened. Next to the officer was a police car, and they just closed the back door after making someone else get in. Oh, what's wrong? I panted breathlessly, my hands on my knees. A sudden dizziness invaded me, almost causing me to fall. Are you okay? I nodded and slowly looked up. Instead of responding, I stared at the window of the car. The glass was tinted, so I couldn't see the interior of the vehicle. Sorry, did you just arrest someone? Yeah, what's the matter? I was feeling like someone was following me just now. Could it have been this person? The man frowned and took out a tiny scrapbook. What's your name? Mine? It's Shiroya Mirana. He looked at me and silently wrote on the paper. Then he suddenly smiled, completely shifting his expression. I see. You can stop worrying then. If you think you're being followed, there's nothing to be afraid of. What? Can't you let me see their face? He looked at the black window. No, I'm not allowed to do that. What about their name or the reason for arresting them? You can stop worrying, believe me. Right now, I'm not allowed to tell you any of that, but just wait for when it's made public. I tried to produce some way of coercing him into telling me more, but I couldn't come up with anything. I have to hurry. Don't hesitate to contact us if you feel like you're being followed again. But I don't think you'll be having any more problems. Okay. The man nodded with a sympathetic smile and opened the door to the driver's side, quickly shutting it again. Then the car began to move and soon disappeared toward the way I'd just run from. I looked by my feet. The tire marks came from far away. Next to them was a group of footprints. These are mine. I looked at the ground earlier specifically for this. And these were definitely not here before. They're the policeman's though. I kept looking down, trying to find a third pair of footprints. There had to be a third pair right here. But I suddenly remembered the strange smile the man had. Something felt odd about him. Wait, these... After taking a few steps forward, I noticed the trail of footprints going from the same direction as the tire tracks. It must be these, since they end where the car was. They also resemble the ones I saw yesterday. I kept following them in reverse, hoping they would lead somewhere. However, I immediately realized that wouldn't work. The more I walked, the more the footprints faded due to the falling snow. Soon I could hardly even make out their shape. I was right. I stopped myself, stress and relief pulling me from both sides. The person who was following me was arrested. Maybe I was right that there was someone else who travelled from the 15th. Depending on what happened, just that alone could have led to their arrest. What mattered was that someone who could have wanted to steal the Sekimeiya was out of the picture. Being able to feel a little calmer in that regard was immensely beneficial. And he said that their identity would be made public. When's that going to be though? Assuming everything up until the 15th repeats itself, it won't be before that day, right? Otherwise, someone who went to the tower would have known a future self of theirs had been arrested. I don't know what to think, but it seems someone had really identified me and been following me. Added to their arrest, assuming that they travelled from the future seemed like the most likely scenario. I turned around. My apartment was right there. I could barely keep myself standing anymore. I approached the staircase while I grabbed the keys and staggered my way to the front door. I lightly shook off the snow on me and turned the key clockwise. Alright, it's time to wrap this one up here because we're out of time for today. What if that other version was... that the person who was following her was like the other Shiroya? And that's why he was like weird about it. I don't know. I'm curious about that one too, but there's no way it's going to be made public before this happens because, you know, when's the trial usually held? Like a year after you do something wrong? Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking out for me, and I'll see you in the next one.